Hello, role-playing people, and in this episode we're going to collect some lore on the most infamous bastions of the Fallen and some of the high cities of the Loyal Host. We can imagine these aren't the only bastions or high cities, but these were the most important during the Celestial War. Not only do these structures tell some pretty amazing stories, but they serve as good examples of what demon storytellers can include in their own games for chronicles that revolve more around exploration, tomb raiding, and uncovering the mysterious past that most Fallen remember only in fragments. The ruins of these bastions and many others might still litter the world of mortals today, and as we're going to see, some of them even connect the physical world to other realms in creation. Without further ado, let's get right into it. The greatest bastion ever built by the rebels is, of course, Ghenam, the Black Cathedral. Found in the Valley of Tears, this fortress is at the same time both city and ecclesiastical edifice. You might not remember this at the moment, but the Valley of Tears is where the rebels revealed themselves to the first mortals and spent an age known as the Long Night, together in peace and prosperity. On the morning after this long night, the world broke, Michael showed up and offered rebels the mercy of being unmade by their true names. The first mortals chose to stand with Lucifer and their newly revealed friends, and the Age of Wrath began after Michael lost the duel with the Morning Star and proceeded to curse the rebels. So, Ghenam was intended as a monument to the rebellion and the love between humans and celestials. It existed in 9 layers, or levels. The first 2 layers were blanketed in shadow, were probably home to members of other legions as well, and led to the forges of Dagon's Iron Legion, which found haven in Ghenam throughout the entire war. They were stationed here and remained loyal to Lucifer for a very, very long time. All of the structures from the 3rd to the 6th layer housed the rebel mortals, which showed adoration for their celestial brothers by constructing monuments to them. The 7th and 8th layers belonged predominantly to Lucifer's Crimson Legion, led by Belial, though we can imagine others resided here as well. And finally, the 9th layer, the Palace of Shadow, was the residence and throne room of Lucifer himself. Ghenam was the last bastion to fall, after a siege that lasted 40 days and 40 nights. This is where the rebels were tried and sentenced before being marched to the pit. The other 3 great bastions were designed to house only a single legion each, and in their construction we can see the echoes of each general's promise to Lucifer. While the Crimson Legion promised to elevate mortals, as the Iron Legion promised to protect them, Abaddon's Ebon Legion vowed to fight the host relentlessly while considering that humanity is indebted to the Fallen and should serve them. The Silver Legion was commanded to unlock the secrets of the world and leave no bounds uncrossed in the search for truth, while Asmodeus promised to also unlock the true potential of humanity. Finally, Azrael's Alabaster Legion was tasked with renewing the race of Adam and Eve now that their immortality was gone. So let's look at the bastions now. Dudel was constructed by devourers and malefactors making use of the plans and concept for Ghenam. As spirits of beasts and wilds and spirits of earth and paths, this idea of having one single fortified location seemed counterintuitive, but given that Dudel was to be erected in the desert, one of the places devoid of vegetation which had appeared after the great sundering of the world, it served as a very good defense against devourer loyalists, of which there were many. A great proportion of the 6th house remained loyal to heaven. So Abaddon decided to change strategy and the rules of the war by making his home in the most inhospitable place possible. Embedded within and underneath hard rock, surrounded by endless burning sands, dotted with geysers which puked forth molten magma and noxious fumes, Dudel stood as a monument to defiance and aggression towards heaven. During the Silent War, the poor mortals who served this legion were not even allowed to go out, and subsisted on various fungi and underground vegetation which grew in the caverns beneath the bastion. After the siege of Sagun, Dudel was also transformed, now that destruction had entered the world following Cain's murder of Abel. The caves were cleared out and replaced by fighting pits, where humans and celestials alike would fight almost constantly when they weren't raiding the host, and sustain horrendous trauma while the Ebon Legion pondered the traits of the perfect mortal warriors. Eventually, other legions were brought into these games, which were sometimes staged just for fun, just so blood would spill, and this led the very competitive Silver Legion to refine and fully develop the lore of flesh. This lore was used by the Ebony Legion in conjunction with the Malefactor's lore of the Forge to create humans and beasts with distinct adaptations, fit to fight even in the most hostile environments, armed to the teeth, which were then used against the host. Dudel thus became a living hell for its mortal captives, both the original inhabitants and the slaves that were constantly brought in after successful raids on the host during both the breaking of the legions and the time of atrocities. Tabet, the watchtower of the Silver Legion, originally intended as a monument to ascension, discovery, and truth, became one huge torture chamber, a monument to cruelty. The tower itself is hidden within a labyrinth of other towers and chimneys which spew viscous smoke into the skies, surrounded by locations such as the Wall of Breath or the Towers of Flesh, which have no official descriptions in the books, but I do believe that's a good thing, really. Like any well-built bastion, Tabet also has an underground system, the so-called bowels of Tabet, where Shatan Koji the Ghostsmith perfected his engines of agony and destruction, which are powered by human souls, after he fled from the Alabaster Legion he betrayed. However, nothing really compares to Belphegor's Palace of Sighs. Constructed from the crater of a volcano with sharpened edges at its height, the palace is sealed off, located at the very depths of the crater, and concealed beneath the storms of fire, lightning, and poison vapors that dance all around and inside the mouth of the crater. Under this deadly protective layer of sharpened rock and storms, which surprisingly looks like a rainbow when observed from below, there are 100 square miles of fertile land and a sparkling lake which both surrounds and is embraced by flesh-colored stone that runs further down but also up the walls of the crater. It looks gorgeous until the observer smells the foul winds and hears the cries of agony coming from the fields and pavilions, or the horrifying devices near the building at the very base of this empty volcano. This is where Belphegor experiments with human breeding, producing anything from hideous half-bestial chimeras bred solely for battle to lesser mortal gods of strength and beauty. But the palace extends even beneath the base of the crater in a place where no mortal can survive. And that is where Belphegor's inner sanctum really is, adorned with textures, lights, and colors which give the impression of walking into a living, multidimensional painting. But enough about the Palace of Sighs, which was destroyed so thoroughly by the host that it was turned into rubble and ash. Nothing more. Even though it came at a horrible price, the Silver Legion kept its promise in Tabet, finding new ways of pulling and shaping the faith of mortals, creating new lores, but especially the lore of humanity, which was created by a devil named Kel Asuf as a horrible tool of deception. It is believed that Kel Asuf is the one who infected others with deception, where before there was none, in a similar way to how Cain infected others with murder. And he deceived many of the Crimson and Iron Legions into believing that Lucifer is a tyrant, just like God and Michael, and there is no way to return to purity, light, and love of humanity, just as there's no reason to follow Lucifer's tyrannical commands. The Silver Legion thus betrayed and separated from the Morning Star during the breaking of the legions, tricking so many of those loyal to him into joining the Separatists, that it is said his pain was so great he wept. Finally, we remember Kasdeja, the city of the dead, the only bastion that wasn't built upward at all, only downward, deeper into the bowels of the earth, all the way into molten rock. But you see, what makes Kasdeja different is also the fact that when the malefactors of the Alabaster Legion hollowed out the earth, they dug into multiple layers of reality under the guidance of the Slayers, creating a sanctuary that would function by distinct rules and which would run alongside everything, parallel to the physical layer of reality, yet always outside of it, accessible only through certain points and techniques. The Slayers constructed an entire realm, in the center of which was a city. A gorgeous city, even more beautiful than those of the lands of the living, some say. Then they brought in a few souls of their own loyal mortals who had passed, souls which had been anchored to physical things so that they wouldn't fade into the unknown. Though the city was beautiful, these human souls craved for the things they cherished in life, their pets and plants, precious baubles and small comforts. So the Slayers worked even harder and found a way to bring those elements into Kasdeja as well, memories of plants that had withered and animals that had perished. They even brought in entire species that were going extinct after the Great Sundering, all for the comfort of mortal souls. And it was good. Once the first human inhabitants were happy with the result, the Slayers brought in others who had been anchored to the earth. Later on, they would bring in all souls who could be saved. And for the longest part of the war, because the malefactors had twisted all the paths leading in and out of this realm, out of the haven, the host just couldn't find it. In time, more islands and cities were built in the haven, and Charon retreated to his own island and city called Stygia. Now, little do others know, in creating this realm, Azrael sought help from both Abaddon's malefactors and Asmodeus's fiends. In exchange for that help, he promised to stop supporting Lucifer and join the Separatists instead. Then, during the Long March, the Crimson and Iron Legions crusade to bring back the Separatists under Lucifer's control. Kasdeja is also besieged, very much like Dudel and Tabet, and it falls. With Azrael returned to Lucifer's side, Charon is left all alone in the deepest parts of the haven, hidden beneath the bastion. Though he is happy that their secret project was never discovered, he is also afraid that it might one day fall, like Kasdeja, like the bastion itself. So out of fear, he continues to dig deeper and deeper beneath his own palace and isle to a place where no one would be able to find him, deeper than even the sea of the underworld. Unsurprisingly, the haven also falls to the loyalists eventually, and during that siege, Charon flees to the special hideout he's been building as a lieutenant of his completely sunders the byway connecting these two, in an attempt to save Charon from being captured. Indeed, he is never seen by angel or demon ever again. This is not explicitly mentioned anywhere, but for fans of Wraith, something tells me that byway must have been the Venus Stair, leading to the labyrinth. Anyhow, after the rebel slayers are removed from their hideout, the loyalists destroy the byways that connect to this place, trapping all of those beloved human souls inside. But what's worse still, as the rebels are imprisoned in the pit, some of them immediately realize the walls of this prison are a perfected version of the same matter they used in the creation of the haven. They created the substance of their own prison. And that is what we know of the 4 greatest bastions of the fallen. Now we're going to have a look at the high cities of the host, and we're going to start with the very first city that fell, Sagun. Also known as the third city and ruled by Anahel of the 4th house, Sagun was located a few leagues past the barrier plains and the mountains of sorrow. It was simple in construction, little more than a labyrinth of stone which is said to have confounded invaders and inhabitants alike. Now, the siege of Sagun was the first one after Cain's murder of Abel. It was the first battle in which the rebels actually used destruction against the host, removing them from creation, and, as the books tell us, this was done by using true names, but a little differently than those who are in human flesh would use them today. Jabniel was the first ever celestial to be unmade by one of his former brothers, and though everyone saw Lirael lift his axe and cut down Jabniel, what actually happened is that the weapon, in passing through the loyalist's form and scraping against the ground, resonated, at least in part, with Jabniel's name, and commanded his destruction, since that was Lirael's intention. That's a very interesting detail if Gaviel's recollection is indeed correct, and it shows how difficult it actually is to destroy Celestials. In one form or another, it can only be done by their true names. But I digress. The Ebony Legion simply slaughtered the horrified loyalists who were pretty much defenseless against such tactics because they couldn't conceive such cruelty, but also because the siege took place while Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel, or Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel, the leaders of the host, were away visiting and testing Cain, who was with Lilith. It is said that only a third of the population of Sagun was able to flee the butchering through the Valley of Reverence, and when they finally reached the other high cities, Makonon and Zebul were already under siege. Of these two, we know Makonon never fell. Throughout the whole war, it never fell. This is the home of Michael, the new voice of God, Lord of the host, the flaming sword and unerring beam. And his home reflects that, given the fiery parapets or crenellations or machicolations, whatever you want to call them, the endless, ever-vigilant patrols of fire angels flying above and around this place every single moment, making any kind of surprise attack or infiltration impossible. On the other hand, the prison city of Zebul, known as the City of Memory, relied on concealment more than the defense of stone and fire. Hidden somewhere in the thick mists that surrounded it, this was the grand archive of the host, predominantly housing members of the 2nd, 4th, and 7th houses, which collected, organized, and maintained all loyalist historical records of the war. They chronicled every single detail, every occurrence, along with all of the names they could find and the transgressions which were committed. The most important structure in the city was the Great Library of Zebul, which contained tomes such as the Book of Names, the Secret Winds, or, supposedly, the Book of Abaddon, which might have been only a copy of the real thing, for you see, Abaddon is said to have recorded his wisdom and experience within the essence of a pair of white doves, which accompanied him everywhere. How that knowledge made its way from the rebel general of the Ebony Legion and into the library of Zebul, no one knows. What is known, however, and heartbreaking, is that the library was set ablaze when Zebul's defenses gave, and almost all of those tomes of immeasurable wisdom were destroyed in the fire. Only scraps and fragments survived, if even. Of Shamaim, the city of reverence, the protectorate of Gabriel, we know it was the second city to fall after Sagun, and the siege was led by none other than Lirael, the first celestial murderer, the one who ended Jabniel and many others during the slaughter of Sagun. There's a legend, if we can call it that, regarding this conflict. It is said the Almighty commanded Gabriel, the Archangel of Mercy, Vengeance, Death, and Revelation, to abandon the fight and flee the city with his remaining troops. Instead, Gabriel chose to stay and fight to protect a beloved mortal woman from the depredations of Lirael, who, after Sagun, get this, had taken to eating the flesh of humans. So Gabriel stood and fought until the first rays of dawn on the last day of battle. And that's all we know. He vanished with the first light of morning, and none of the Ebon Legion boasted destroying him. It is unclear whether he was destroyed at all, or unmade by the host for his disobedience, but his name never ever resonated in the abyss after imprisonment, and after this siege, no rebel had seen them again, Gabriel or his mortal love. Finally, we remember Araboth, the city of lament and solitude, the only city that was undefended and its gates were always open. It was destroyed 7 times throughout the war, and somehow rebuilt exactly as it had been before, giving the impression that it had never been destroyed at all, which baffled the rebels to no end. This was the domain of Kaiel, an angel of tears and solitudes, whose only task is said to have been lamenting and weeping for creation, bemoaning the deeds of celestials and mortals alike. The city itself was an extension of this duty, open to any rebel who wished to repent and accept judgment. In 1,000 years of war, less than 100 fallen entered its unbarred gates, and of all of their names, none were ever spoken again. Now that we have this information, how does it affect the demon games we actually run? It's all in the past, something that happened during the Age of Wrath. It's all just fluff and narration. Why should we care? The reason we should care is because some of these high cities and bastions weren't destroyed after the conclusion of the war. Hidden at the intersection of barely existing layers of creation, invisible to the mortal eye and still undisturbed by the now sleeping earthbound, are the ancient bastions, dotting the landscape of the contemporary world, just waiting to be discovered. Bastions like the Ravener's underwater fortress known as Lemuria. In the player's guide, we are told of various domains such as the Palace of Sighs, we've already mentioned, but also the small fief known as Eresh, belonging to Ekishnugal. Players are given bastion templates, rules, and mechanics for creating their own, through rituals or other lores, and most importantly, they're given examples of bastions which stand to this day, from strictly physical structures made of stone to extra-dimensional wonders that have distinct ecosystems which were left in at least some form of balance and still endure to this day. My point is, Demon so beautifully allows and encourages occasionally playing into the more fantastical and supernatural elements which are just waiting to be discovered if the storyteller wishes to take the chronicle in that direction. I've heard a lot of players upset by the fact that the Fallen can't travel through the Umbral Realms. Why? Why can't they? Just because they haven't been able to do it after their release, decrepit and weak, and just because they don't remember doing it, doesn't mean it can't be done. The setting of Demon, though dark, faithless, mostly faithless, full of trauma and pain, is also filled with wonders of ages past, not just the ruins of the high cities or the greatest of bastions, but also these little pocket dimensions which served as refuge for individual celestials and their beloved mortals, or a nature reserve for species that went extinct, or extra-dimensional armories full of relics. What's even better is each and every one of these places has its own history and had its own role in the Celestial War. They are remnants of a past that will always haunt the Fallen, just waiting to be remembered. So that is why these elements matter and create awesome stories, even in the faithless and bleak contemporary world of Demon the Fallen, inches away from the time of judgment. And that is why, in one of the following Demon episodes, whichever it might be, we're going to create our own extra-dimensional bastion from scratch. Thank you very much for listening. Take care, have fun, and don't forget